In this episode, we start with a topic that sits quietly underneath almost every strong security program, even though many beginners do not notice it at first. Network architecture design and segmentation are really about making deliberate choices before trouble starts, so systems, users, and data do not all sit in one giant shared space with no meaningful boundaries. When a network is arranged well, it supports the business, helps people do their jobs, and also makes life harder for an attacker who gets inside. When it is arranged poorly, even a small mistake such as one compromised laptop, one weak password, or one exposed service can spread risk across far more of the organization than anyone expected. That is why this topic matters so much for someone studying CompTIA CySA+, because analysts are constantly interpreting signs of malicious movement, and those signs make much more sense when you understand how the environment was meant to be separated in the first place. At a basic level, network architecture design means deciding how different parts of an organization's technology environment connect, communicate, and depend on one another. It is not just about routers, switches, and cables, although those are part of it. It is also about trust, access, data flow, system purpose, and the assumptions an organization makes about who or what should be allowed to talk to what. A well-designed architecture considers users, servers, applications, cloud services, remote access, security monitoring, and business processes as parts of one connected whole. That matters because security problems rarely stay inside a single device. They move across relationships, and architecture defines those relationships. If payroll systems, development tools, public web services, and employee laptops all live too close together with weak boundaries, an attacker does not need extraordinary skill to move from a small foothold to a much more serious compromise. Good design reduces that opportunity by shaping the environment so that access is intentional instead of accidental. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. One of the most important ideas for beginners to understand is the difference between a flat network and a segmented network. In a flat network, many devices and systems exist in one broad space where communication is relatively easy and internal barriers are limited. That may seem convenient because it reduces complexity at first, but convenience often creates hidden danger. If an attacker compromises one machine in a flat environment, they may be able to discover many other systems, probe services, reuse credentials, or move laterally with fewer restrictions. In a segmented network, the environment is divided into smaller sections based on business purpose, sensitivity, or function, and movement between those sections is controlled. That means a compromise in one area does not automatically become a compromise everywhere else. For a security analyst, this difference changes the meaning of alerts. A suspicious connection between two systems in the same open network may not surprise anyone, but the same connection across a protected boundary can be a much stronger sign of malicious activity or policy violation. Segmentation is easiest to understand if you picture a building rather than a digital network. A secure building does not usually have one giant room containing the front desk, executive offices, server equipment, payroll records, shipping dock, and research lab all mixed together. Instead, there are walls, doors, badge readers, restricted areas, and different levels of access based on role and purpose. Networks work the same way. Segmentation creates zones so that devices serving one purpose are grouped together and separated from devices serving another purpose. A public-facing web server may need to receive traffic from outside the organization, while a database containing customer records should have far stricter access rules. Employee laptops may need internet access and application access, but they probably should not have direct, unrestricted communication with domain controllers, security appliances, or industrial systems. Segmentation does not mean nothing can communicate. It means communication happens by design, under rules, and with enough visibility that unusual connections stand out instead of blending into the background. A common misconception is that segmentation is only for very large enterprises with massive budgets and complex environments. In reality, The principle applies to almost any organization, even a small one. The size of the network may change, but the logic stays the same. Different types of systems carry different levels of risk, and placing them in separate zones lowers the chance that a single problem becomes an organization-wide incident. Another misconception is that segmentation automatically solves security problems by itself. It does not. Weak passwords, poor patching, insecure remote access, and careless permissions can still create real exposure. Segmentation is better understood as risk reduction through structure. It limits options for an attacker, increases friction against lateral movement, and improves visibility for defenders. Even if a compromise occurs, a segmented environment can buy time, reduce blast radius, and make the investigation easier because fewer systems should legitimately communicate across those boundaries. That alone can be the difference between a manageable event and a major business disruption. Strong architectural decisions usually begin with business understanding rather than technology enthusiasm. Before anyone can separate a network intelligently, they need to know what systems exist, what those systems do, who relies on them, and what would happen if they failed or were compromised. A payment system, a human resources portal, a file share for general office use, and a building access controller do not carry identical business importance or identical security needs. The same is true for data types. Public marketing content, internal meeting notes, sensitive financial records, customer identifiers, and administrative credentials should not all receive the same level of exposure. Architecture design becomes meaningful when it reflects those differences. A beginner should notice that security is not just about protecting everything in the same way. It is about applying protection in proportion to value, sensitivity, and consequence. Segmentation is one of the clearest examples of that principle because it turns business priorities into network boundaries that shape access, monitoring, and trust in practical, visible ways. When organizations design segmented networks, they often create areas based on function, exposure, or sensitivity. Public-facing services are often separated from internal systems because they must accept traffic from the outside world and therefore carry greater exposure. Critical internal services, such as authentication infrastructure, management systems, or sensitive databases are often placed behind tighter restrictions because compromise there would create outsized damage. User devices are usually treated differently from server networks because laptops and desktops are more likely to be exposed to phishing, unsafe browsing, removable media, or travel-related risk. Guest networks are typically isolated from corporate resources because visitors should not share the same trust level as employees. You may also encounter a demilitarized zone, DMZ, which is a network segment used to host systems that need to interact with untrusted networks while remaining separated from more sensitive internal assets. The exact shapes vary, but the design goal stays consistent. Place similar trust needs together and create controlled paths where communication must cross from one trust level to another. The rules governing those controlled paths are just as important as the segments themselves. A boundary without meaningful control is only an illusion of separation. Organizations often enforce boundaries through firewalls, filtering rules, routing policies, and access control lists, ACLS, all of which help decide which traffic is permitted, denied, or inspected between segments. The important beginner insight is that segmentation is not merely drawing boxes on a diagram. It is defining what kind of communication is allowed, in what direction, under what conditions, and for what reason. A payroll application server may need to reach a database on a specific service port, while employee laptops should have no reason to do so directly. A security monitoring platform may need to receive logs from many segments, but ordinary user devices should not be able to administer that platform. Good architecture makes those relationships narrow and intentional. Overly broad rules weaken segmentation because attackers can often hide inside allowed traffic if the organization permits far more communication than business operations truly require. Another valuable concept is that not all segmentation is physical. Beginners sometimes imagine separate networks only as completely different hardware environments, but many organizations use logical separation as well. A virtual local area network, VLAN, can separate traffic into distinct broadcast domains even when systems share the same switching infrastructure. Subnets can divide addressing and help organize routing and policy. In cloud environments, separation may be defined through virtual networks, security groups, route tables, and identity-driven controls rather than through a traditional on-premises layout. The security principle remains the same across all of them. Reduce unnecessary connectivity and manage trust intentionally. This matters because modern organizations do not live in one place. They may have headquarters, branch offices, remote workers, cloud workloads, software as a service platforms, and third-party connections all interacting at once. A security analyst studying suspicious activity must recognize that architecture now spans many environments, and segmentation needs to follow the data and the trust boundaries rather than staying trapped inside an old picture of a single office building full of hardware. Identity also plays a major role in architecture design, even when the conversation sounds focused on networks. A segment is stronger when the systems inside it do not trust every authenticated user equally. That is one reason security teams increasingly tie segmentation to role, device health, and application need rather than simply to physical location. Just because someone is connected to an internal network does not mean they should automatically have broad access to sensitive services. This thinking aligns with the broader zero-trust approach, where trust is limited, verified, and continuously examined rather than assumed based on network position alone. For a beginner, the key point is that modern architecture is not just about where traffic comes from. It is also about who is requesting access, from what device, under what conditions, and for what legitimate purpose. Segmentation becomes much more powerful when network boundaries and identity controls reinforce each other, because that creates multiple decision points that an attacker must overcome instead of a single barrier that, once crossed, opens too much of the environment. From a defender's point of view, one of the biggest benefits of segmentation is improved detection. Security analysts spend a great deal of time trying to separate normal behavior from suspicious behavior, and that job becomes easier when the environment has clear boundaries. In a poorly designed network, almost everything can talk to almost everything else, so suspicious traffic may look ordinary simply because there are few meaningful expectations. In a segmented network, communication patterns are narrower, more predictable, and easier to validate against business purpose. If a user workstation starts reaching into a restricted management segment, that behavior can stand out quickly. If a web server begins initiating connections to internal administrative systems, that may suggest compromise or misuse. The value here is not only prevention, it is also signal quality. Architecture design shapes the context around alerts, logs, and anomalies. A security tool may report a connection attempt, but an analyst who understands the intended segmentation can judge much faster whether that attempt represents normal operation, misconfiguration, policy drift, or a likely intrusion. Segmentation is especially useful against lateral movement, which is the process by which attackers move from one system to another after gaining an initial foothold. Many real attacks do not begin with direct access to the most valuable target. They begin with something smaller and less protected, such as a user device, a forgotten server, a weak remote access point, or a third-party connection. From there, the attacker explores, gathers credentials, identifies relationships, and tries to expand control. A flat network makes this easier because there are fewer boundaries to challenge them. A segmented architecture forces the attacker to cross multiple trust barriers, and each crossing may require different credentials, different techniques, or generate different logs. That added friction matters. Even when the attacker succeeds in crossing one boundary, they may still be blocked from reaching the most sensitive assets. For analysts, that means suspicious attempts to access a new segment, unusual authentication patterns, or unexpected service connections can reveal attacker progression earlier, before full impact occurs. At the same time, poor segmentation can create its own problems when it is designed without operational reality in mind. If boundaries are too confusing, rules are too broad, or exceptions are granted carelessly, the design may look secure on paper but fail in practice. Users and administrators will often seek shortcuts when controls make their work harder without clear benefit. Over time, temporary allowances can pile up until the environment drifts away from its intended state. Another risk is oversegmentation without understanding dependencies. If important systems are separated without proper planning, legitimate business processes may break, leading teams to weaken controls in a hurry. Good design balances protection with usability. It aims for clear purpose, manageable policy, and ongoing review rather than complexity for its own sake. Security analysts should appreciate this because alerts are influenced by both design and drift. A segment that once reflected strict trust boundaries may no longer do so after years of hurried changes, and that gap between architecture intent and operational reality is often where security weakness quietly develops. One reason this subject appears on CySA Plus is that analysts benefit from thinking like both defenders and investigators. When reviewing an alert, packet capture, or suspicious authentication event, it helps to ask what this system is supposed to be able to reach and why. Architecture provides that answer. If a database server communicates with an application server, that may be expected. If the same database server starts reaching outward to employee devices or scanning other internal networks, the behavior becomes far more significant. Segmentation also helps during incident response because containment decisions often depend on network boundaries. Teams may isolate a user segment, restrict inter-segment traffic, or increase scrutiny around a sensitive zone while they determine what happened. Even before an incident occurs, architecture supports resilience by limiting the spread of ransomware, reducing accidental exposure, and preserving critical services when one part of the environment is under stress. The analyst does not need to design every network personally, but understanding design intent makes detection, triage, escalation, and communication much stronger. As you bring all of this together, the big idea is that network architecture design and segmentation are about creating security through thoughtful structure rather than relying on hope. A good environment does not assume every device is harmless, every user is trustworthy, or every internal connection is acceptable just because it originates from inside the organization. Instead, it separates systems by purpose, sensitivity, and trust, then controls the paths between them in ways that support both business operations and security monitoring. That design reduces the blast radius of mistakes, improves the visibility of suspicious behavior, and makes attacker movement more difficult and easier to notice. For a new learner, that is the lasting takeaway. Segmentation is not just a technical feature hidden deep in infrastructure. It is a practical defense strategy that shapes how risk spreads, how alerts are interpreted, and how well an organization can withstand the moment when one compromised system tries to become many.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.